Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Radioflash. Gotta say, for this movie, currently available on Hulu, this movie starts out really unique and interesting, and then the further and further we get into this film, it feels like they start to become less and less creative to where they really stick to the theme of the movie. And then it just kind of goes on. It's like, okay, like, so they only really thought about this film up until a certain point, and then they really had the theme carry the rest of the film. And I was like, well, that is what it is, I guess. It's very hard to have a post-apocalyptic movie that is to feel unique enough. But like, I'm sure with a lot of these people who went on and did this movie, it's like, yeah, but this is so fun to do. This is so cool to do, and I don't blame them. Like, it's always a really fun theme to play around with. So, so for this movie, I definitely would still give it a thumbs up. It's an okay film. Eventually, once you get interested in the beginning of it, you'll be hooked for the rest of the film. And so I gotta say that this movie does feel quite similar to the Elliot Page movie, Into the Forest, where we have Elliot Page and her sister who ends up kind of getting stuck in their home throughout most of the movie, and then crazy things happen during the film. But I would have to go on and say that this movie, compared to that, is fairly similar, and you'll understand why if you go on and watch both movies. But really, with that said, what happens in this film? So, teeing it up, in the very beginning of this film, we have Reese, who's to be this game developer, tech girl, and so she is to be doing these kind of escape rooms and all these interesting things. So Reese then comes home to her daddy, to her father, to Chris, and they all of a sudden are eating their hamburgers, and all of a sudden it seems that electricity had went out in not only their home, but it seems the homes around them. So all of a sudden, we, of course, have Reese, who is to know of a grandfather that is to be this kind of very, guy who plans ahead, let's just say. This conspiracy theorist, a guy who is to have everything planned out for the world possibly ending at any moment. And so Reese is to give her grandfather, Frank, a call. Call by going on and using these generators slash car batteries to then go on and hook onto this radio to then try and talk to her grandfather Frank. Frank is to go on and tell Reese that Reese and Chris should pack up all their stuff and make their way to him because he has more than enough food to keep them safe and keep them without hunger or needing to go out and scavenge and whatever, because has really hit the fan. So we have Reese, who then is to go on with her father to drive their way to their grandfather's location. And one thing leads to another, and eventually Reese is to be left by herself, let's just say, trying to be as vague as we can, and Reese ends up in the worst possible location that she can be in, desperately hoping she can have this walkie-talkie that is to have a certain range, where she can desperately call out to her grandfather, hoping that at some point he will find her and he will get her back to his place to keep her safe. I know that was very, very vague, especially once we got to the later part of the movie, but There's a lot of this movie that feels like very post-apocalyptic generic, and really the whole main thing is eventually Reese going and finding her grandpapa, as if this is like a Red Riding Hood kind of a film that has a post-apocalyptic theme. And there's a reason why there's also a bear present in this movie also. But really, the thing that I don't quite understand within the image that we have here, the scene with the bear and the two kids that are right on this picture, that's not actually what happens in the film. We do have a bear in this movie, but like really, like the bear is like briefly used. I don't even know why they even have like a bear in the trailer, like, because I guess it's like, well, hey man, we spent a lot of money to have this bear go on and be in this film, so we gotta figure out a way to just add it in the trailer, or and add it into the photos to make it seemingly look different than any post-apocalyptic movie that you've seen, because bear. But anyways, so with that said, let's just go on into actual spoilers so you can get a real inkling of what this movie really is. So at the end of the day, it's about that time to say that it's about that double time 5 territory. Let's go into spoilers. Spoilers. It's about time to again to spoil this movie. But so in the very beginning of this film, we have Reese, who is in this room with a bunch of telephones. Oddly. Reese, of course, is looking at all these telephones. She has this phone number she doesn't quite understand. And on the ceiling of this room, we have a toilet. And all of a sudden, this room is to start to fill up with water. We, of course, have Reese, who's to answer one of these phones, and the phone just continues to say, "Congratulations, you've just gone on to have a royal flush." And Reese is like, "Okay, whatever that means." So, considering it continues to say royal flush, Reese is to have this possible idea that this whole trap may have something to do with the toilet. So Reese then goes on and is to have the water kind of fill up more of this room, and she realizes that the toilet is to not have this flush handle on it. So she's like, okay, this is strange. So Reese then goes on and is to look at the phone number and try to figure out, like, okay, like there must be a piece missing here. And we have Reese is like, well, hey, like, figure out the solution, not the problem. So Reese is, of course, to go on and take one of these phones and call the number that is on this post-it note. And all of a sudden, Reese is to realize that she can just yank a phone part out of this phone, and that phone, of course, is to have the toilet handle. Reese then puts on the toilet handle, flushes the toilet, and solves the problem. So she eventually figures out this escape room, and then all of a sudden she ends up unhooking this VR headset that she's in, and we find out that she's in some game arcade place that she was going on and playing this in, some VR location. And so Reese goes on home and is to be on her computer typing away, finding out that I guess there was some cheat for this game. And Reese is like, well, that would have really helped me out hours ago. And the person that is texting her is saying, like, well, I thought you didn't cheat. And Reese is like, well, yeah. So Reese gets a text from her papa, who is to go on and tell Reese that, hey, like, I got dinner, burgers, get ready to eat, kind of thing. So Reese goes on and starts talking to Chris, and Chris is asking Reese about her game developing and how it's all going. So all of a sudden, while they're eating their burgers, we then go on and eventually have them lose electricity. And so they end up getting their flashlights out, and they're like, okay, well, like maybe the power is going to go on soon. Maybe it's just us. But they go on and they see that everywhere around them outside, like the power is also lost there also. So they go on and they're at home and they're just chillaxing. And so Reese is to go on and get this car battery and hook it up to somehow uh, this radio for her to go on and contact her grandfather named Frank, who at the same time is in some room listening to a number of radio frequencies to have Frank realize what has all happened here. So we have Reese, who is technically calling Frank through this frequency, and Frank is like, "Oh my God, Reese! Like, hey, like." So Frank is to go on and tell Reese that her and her father should eventually make their way to him. Frank wants Reese to go and get Chris, but Reese is telling Frank that Chris is asleep. So Frank is just like, well, hey, like tomorrow morning, when you guys wake up, have Chris talk to me on the radio, so I can kind of tell him what's all going on. So Reese agrees that they should go off and get ready to leave here to make their way to her grandfather's. So Reese is to wake up Chris the next day in his bed. And here's the thing, like, wasn't Reese and Chris, like, didn't they fall asleep by this couch? But then all of a sudden the very next day, I guess Chris is instead had fallen asleep in this bed. It is what it is with this film. So Reese wakes Chris up to tell him that that she had contacted her grandfather through the radio, and that they said, or that he said, that they need to leave. So Chris then goes on to go to the radio and is talking to Frank, because I guess luckily they're both at the radio at the same miraculous time. So Chris is to go on and ask Frank, it's like, well, hey, like, what's really going on here? And Frank is to mention that an EMP was hit all over the country, and like they're basically in the dark ages. So Chris is just like, oh, okay, all right. Like, so like Chris is getting everything prepared, following Frank's instructions. We also had a moment between both Reese and Chris the night before where they were looking at these photos of course, both of them and their mom to come and find out that Reese's mother had passed away. I'm assuming from some kind of cancer or illness of some sort. Wasn't exactly very specific, but anyways. So Reese is to go on and have baby pictures and stuff like that, and Chris to mention how Reese was to be some like larva girl who was in this cocoon, and all she would do is just kind of move her eyes, and that's all she would really do. And eventually she at some point was going to go on and do more than that. So Chris and Reese get everything prepared, or even going on and draining the toilet of water into this canteen, to the point where it seems mostly, out of all the stuff, it seems that they grab like Gatorade and stuff like that, they're always just drinking this toilet water, which doesn't make sense to me. Because obviously they end up grabbing like Gatorade, like things, but they just continue to just drink the toilet water. It's part of the film. So we have Reese and we have Chris. They're going on and getting gas, and going through this store, and everybody is bum rushing to get all this water from the store. And so when Reese is telling Chris to get water, yeah, like it seems like everybody is taking and all the water. Like I never went on and really much shopped right around when like COVID was happening, but I could just imagine. Um, like I saw like kind of the aftermath of it, and just kind of saw a lot of people who had like entire aisles worth of toilet paper all emptied out. And I thought that that was kind of crazy. But no one really understood the whole toilet paper thing, anyways. But so we go on and have Reese and we have Chris, who are to just continue to drive on because that's all that they can really do here. Because there seems to be some chaos going on in stores and everything like that. So we have a moment where it seems that there is to be this police officer who is trying to calm a number of people down and just kind of telling them like, hey, like relax everybody, just go back in your homes and just light candles and everything will be perfectly fine. So trying to calm everybody down because everybody's desperately wanting answers, and so they're looking for this police officer for answers, and the guy's like, well, I don't know as much as you do, so like just kind of go back home and just kind of stay there, and like eventually things will come back to the way they are. So Chris and Reese go on to drive down this road, and all of a sudden there is this massive, or not massive, there is this accident that happens between this bus and this other vehicle. Coming to find out, one of the bikers is to try to hold on to this one girl as she, of course, passes away. So Chris and Reese are trying to see if there's anything that they can do to help, so they start walking down this stretch of road to see like what is going on here. All of a sudden we have chaos rumble between these bikers, between this truck, where this guy in this truck is to all of a sudden get pushed around by these bikers to the point of him getting back into his truck and just ramming into this car to continue to just drive on so he can just get out of here. So coming to find out, the woman that is nearby the bus ends up, of course, dying because it's not like they can call 911, or there possibly wasn't any hospitals nearby, so these guys had to just try to do the best they could. So we have Reese and we have Chris, who I guess has an open road for them to drive through now. So we have Reese and we have Chris who are driving further on, and what ends up happening in some part of this road is to eventually lead both Reese and Chris to then lose control of their car going into some woods, and they end up crashing their car into some tree. When they both wake up, after Reese is having some dream about her mother, Chris is to wake up Reese and to tell her to try to get out of her side of the car because he can't get out of his. So they go on and start drinking the toilet water, and Chris is going on to say, this is the best toilet water that I've ever tasted. So, because it's a joke. So it seems that we go on and have Chris, who is having problems with the side of his body, and we would have to naturally assume that his ribs are probably broken, because that's the only thing that I could assess or assume. More than likely, there might be something wrong with his hip also, that is to like have him issues with walking. But I'm assuming it's probably broken ribs, because that's really difficult for you to have to go on and go anywhere. So Reese is going along with Chris into this woods, and while they continue to walk, Chris needs breaks in between, and so Reese finally wants to know what is really wrong with her dad. And Reese goes on and is to take this moss and put it over the canteen to filter through the water. And so Chris is go on to take a swig of like, yeah, I guess that is a better toilet water than we had before. So Reese is to then want to know what Chris's injuries really are, and we see this massive purple bruise on Chris' side of his body. And not only that, Dominic looks really good, looks really in shape. What a guy! Uh, that was it is what it is. So eventually Reese and Chris continue to push on, and eventually we get to the point where probably Chris is feverish or sick and just calls out for his daughter to get help, because he eventually can no longer walk any further, and he probably is sick. He probably is like deathly ill. So we have Reese, who goes on and finds Farmer Glenn. And here's the one thing that I don't understand about this movie. We had Reese, who's to be consistently visited by this old man that keeps appearing throughout this film. I don't know what that means. Like, is this to be like Father Death or the Reaper or something? Every time Reese is to feel like she's going to die soon, this old man just kind of pops out of nowhere, but like, hey, I'm here. Because I don't really understand what this guy was supposed to be, but he just consistently pops up throughout this film, and I didn't understand who it was. But that's someone beyond Farmer Glenn here. It's another old guy. But anyways, so Reese is to find a place where this guy Glenn is there, and so Glenn is to take his little four-wheeler out to go on and see where Chris is, to then have him go to Glenn's place. We also had at one point Chris's vehicle that said Jeep on it, and they ended up removing the P. I guess to like, because you don't want to have like certain kind of logos or sponsorship on certain kind of movies. Hence why you tend to rarely ever really see logos all that often in a lot of films, so they try to avoid them for whatever reason. So we push on, and there's a lot of times where like stuff ends up getting like blurred or having to be like censored out weirdly in films, simply because of a logo somewhere. It's weird. But shows tend to do that a lot too, where on certain ball caps you'd eventually see tape over them, or like, I don't know what it is with logos, but I guess it is what it is. So moving on. So Chris is now on this couch, and Glenn is trying to take care of him as much as humanly possible. When Reese is to go on and get this water, she ends up seeing this weird-looking old man again. And by the time Reese makes her way back to Glenn, Glenn is to mention that Chris was to stop breathing. Reese realizes that now her father is dead, and there's nothing she could have done about it. She ends up burying Chris, or we just see her by a seemingly buried person that could have been Chris or could have not been Chris. I'd like to hope not. She just puts a flower over some a place that they're maybe going to plant something soon. No, Chris is dead, sadly enough. So we then go on and have Reese with Farmer Glenn making their way to Reese's grandfather's place. So Glenn is to go on and talk to Reese about what it all happened, and is to mention how also how much possibly all of this isn't really doing much to affect him, because of how he is to go on and live his life, so on and so forth. So all of a sudden, we are to go on and have Farmer Glenn, who is seeing a guy uh, parked, and he is to kind of wave Glenn down. And so Glenn is kind of suspicious about this man. So Glenn goes on and tells Reese to get in the back of this vehicle, this kind of RV looking like vehicle. So what ends up happening is we end up having we have the guy who was to be needing help going on and asking Glenn how much gas that he has in his vehicle, and then Glenn is to be taken from his vehicle and shot. So the guy ends up taking this guy's vehicle, driving off to seemingly a very junkyardish location, to where I guess this guy is to go on and sift through and find certain items that eventually might help him in the future. But then all of a sudden, this guy ends up eventually being met with a guy named Bill, I believe, who ends up killing him. And so when Reese is to try to run from this vehicle to get away from these people, we then have Bill, who finds this girl, grabs her, and takes her back to his place. So we have Reese meeting with a woman called Ma, and Ma is to be in this kind of very obscure looking chair slash wheelchair kind of a thing. Looks like it has some kind of like weird bicycle parts that are to get her around, I guess. It's very interesting and very obscure. So we have Ma, who is going on with her and her oldest son, or her and her, yeah, I guess her son, and eating bear, because I guess the best meat to possibly eat is bear. I guess the only real meat to go on besides that to really eat is pig. But it seems that they go on and find a lot of bear meat, and so they go on and they eat it. So it seems that these people are to technically know what's going on in the world. And so when Reese is to try to tell them that she's going to try to go off to her grandfather's, they're like, well, yeah, that's great and all, but we want to keep you here. Like, you're going to have some good usage here. Really meaning that Ma wants Reese to stay here so she can have companions for the rest of her male family. And when Reese tries to escape quietly in the middle of the night, they go on and they try to grab Reese and retrieve her and then chuck her in the cellar. So Ma gives Reese the option. It's like, well, hey, you could either stay with us and be a companion to my son and his son, or you can go on and go back to the cellar. And Reese goes on and is to say that she wants to go back to the cellar. So Ma's just like, well, okay then. So they put her back in the cellar, and so we now have a kid named Quinn who gives her an apple to eat. And Reese is hoping that Quinn is going to help her escape out of here. And so Reese is to mention, hey, is there a key here so I can get out of this room? Like, I just want to get out of here and leave. And Quinn ends up instead breaking from the roof of this room because the wood is just very thin. And he ends up bringing a rope down for both Quinn and both Reese to escape out of. And so Quinn and Reese run off together into the woods. Oh, we also have a moment where in this movie before Reese was used as bait to lure a bear. That's what the bear is to be the only thing that he's really in the movie for. So Quinn is in this sack hanging above this tree, and she's used as bait to lure this bear to be near her. And Quinn keeps kicking the bear, trying to get it away from her as she's just held up in this sack. And so we have Bill who ends up shooting this bear so that way they can have more bear meat. And so we then have Reese put into the cellar afterwards, and then she tries to escape. So back to it. So Bill is to find that both Quinn and Reese have escaped, so he chases after them. And so we go on and have Reese, who has this map. And she's trying to figure out where her grandfather's location is, and she tries to walkie her grandfather, hoping that he's possibly nearby. So we then have Bill finally get to where both Reese and Quinn are, and so Bill starts to go on and starts beating down his own son. And so then we have Reese desperately calling for her grandfather, hoping that he'll arrive, and conveniently, by the end of this movie, we have him appear. As really, Frank had gone on and consistently tracked Reese throughout her whole part of this movie, and he is just slowly but surely behind. And he goes on and finds certain people dead. He goes on to find a number of stuff and a number of things that is to just be slowly but surely behind of where Reese really is. But then eventually he finds her by the end of all this. And so either Reese or Frank were to take the shot to kill Bill and Uma Thurman. And so then by the end of this, we go on and we have Frank, who is to take in both Quinn and both Reese, to eventually just kind of take care of them, charge up their iPads and their phones and whatever, so they can go on and continue to look at old photos or old videos and stuff like that. And eventually, by the end of this movie, we come to find out that Quinn is looking at this iPad that has a number of presidential alerts and stuff like that. And they just keep popping up and popping up and popping up. And Quinn is like, oh my god, something's going horribly awry. And then the movie just ends. So, with that said, yeah. I think the only thing that I missed out about was the point when Reese was in that cellar and had that apple and ended up getting like a little bit of her stuff back to her. She ends up looking in the videos and just kind of looking back at photos of her father or just her past, and that's the only thing that I really kind of quickly went over. But yeah, other than that, I think that was it. I think that's all I wanted to go on and talk about for Radio Flash. Let me know in the comments below how you felt about Radio Flash. Really the way of which that they go on and explain what the heck Radio Flash even is to have a book called Radio Flash. As if, like, hey, don't look this word up in the dictionary because here's a book right here that says it in gold lettering. So Reese goes on and opens up this book and is to realize, hey, is a radio flash going on, grandfather? And he's like, how do you know about that? And Reese is like, well, I just read it in a book that you left here. And so he's like, well, that's convenient. And Reese is like, yeah, I know, right? The title of the movie, right into a book near me, so I can understand what's going on in this world. So, uh, so yeah, like that was a little bit of goofy convenience for us to really understand what's going on right now in this story. But yeah, that was another detail that I kind of skipped around about because I thought it was so silly and so goofy. But other than that, yeah, let me know how you felt about this movie, if you went on and saw it, if you didn't see it, if you're thinking about seeing it now that I went on and said all these things about it. Let me know in the comments below how you feel about this review, because I'm sure that there's some people that were to go on and like this movie for whatever reason. So I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.